Hello and welcome to Good Evening Britain, a Force for Good's weekly show coming to you live from our studios here in the heart of the great British city of Glasgow. With me, your host, Alistair McConnachie. We're broadcasting throughout the United Kingdom and across the world. We're bringing you quality pro-UK comment and analysis every Wednesday from 7 until 8 p.m, broadcasting on all our digital platforms, including YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok. And as always, the best viewing experience is on our youtube.com/UK, a force for good. Thank you to everybody that will be watching tonight. Thank you. Please do send in your comments. Do send in what you think is going on in the world and what your particular opinion of it may be, and we will read out your comments and we will give you a shout out to the world which is watching. And we're going to be talking this evening about the Supreme Court carry-on that is happening right now. It started yesterday, it finishes today. The Supreme Court is listening to the arguments from the Lord Advocate about why Nicola Sturgeon believes that she should be able to have a referendum next year. What are the rights and wrongs of that? We'll be looking at that. We'll be also talking about Nicola. We'll also be looking at her comments wherein she expressed her detestation of people who are quote-unquote Tories. What does that mean for Scottish politics, and why on earth would she say such a nasty thing? Why would she say that? Well, we'll be giving you the answer to that. We're also going to be looking at busting an Indy myth. You know, there's some Scottish nationalists out there who say that we unionists are scared to have a second referendum. Well, that's a load of baloney. Of course, we're not scared. There are good reasons why we oppose it, and we'll be rehearsing some of those arguments for you. On top of that, we'll also have our competition at the bottom of the hour, and the winner of our competition tonight will receive this lovely little Union Jack Mini Cooper fridge magnet. Okay, that's a nice little thing. And you know what? Because we've got a very big heart, we are also going to throw in a Union Jack trolley token also. So you can't say that we're not good for you. Okay, now please, if you're watching on TikTok, do give us a follow. We've been knocking it out the park on TikTok. Today we passed 7,200 followers, which is extremely good going for us. And if you're watching on Twitter, please press that button that says quote tweet, write us a positive comment and fire that out to the world, and we will retweet you later on this evening as well. And of course, on YouTube, if you haven't subscribed to us, please do subscribe to us on YouTube. Well, we're going to start by looking at what's happening in the Supreme Court, right? You might have heard about this. Basically, to cut a long story short, the Scottish National Party and the Green a bill. Sorry about that. To cut a long story short, the SNP and the Greens want to introduce a bill into Holyrood which will allow them to hold a second referendum. And normally the Lord Advocate, which is the chief law officer in Scotland, would normally tell them whether or not it was appropriate for them to bring in such a bill, because of course there's certain areas of law that a devolved parliament can't make law on. And normally the Lord Advocate should have said to Nicola Sturgeon that I'm afraid that's a reserved matter. But for whatever reason, she felt that she couldn't make that call, and so she knocked it upstairs for the Supreme Court to make the decision on that particular matter. And that's where we are at the moment. And so the Supreme Court are listening to the arguments from either side, and the main one from the British government is that the Lord Advocate essentially shouldn't be knocking these questions upstairs every time there's a difficult issue. She should be making that decision in real time at Holyrood, because it's not for the British government to come in and really stop Holyrood making laws. It's for the Lord Advocate to know what the law says and to be clear about that, and to be able to say to the Scottish nationalists, I'm sorry, but that's not within your competency. However, because it's such a vexed issue, the Lord Advocate did not have the cajoles to make that particular decision, and so has asked the Supreme Court to make that decision for her. So we'll see what happens. We're told that after the hearing has ended today, that it will be several weeks before we actually hear. But most people imagine that the Supreme Court will come back and they'll say, look, sorry, you have to make that decision for yourself. You can't be asking us to make those decisions. Or the Supreme Court may actually come out very clearly and say anything to do with referendums for the future of the United Kingdom is well outside of Holyrood's authority. But what are your thoughts on that matter? Do send in your thoughts. Adam says, the SNP and Sturgeon are shrinking in the polls while Labour appears to rise from the dead. Good to see Alan, who says, likes the new flag, God save the king. You won't see this if you're on TikTok, it's just slightly hidden from the camera, but really nice flag there. We got that, and we'll be using that. We've got one or two of those coming in, so I'm told, and so we'll be using them in street activism going forward. Janice says she was embarrassed for the Lord Advocate. Well, I saw the Lord Advocate making her case yesterday, and I thought it was like one of these videos that you watch on YouTube if you're trying to get to sleep. You know, it's like put on the Lord Advocate and I should be in the land of Nod within a few seconds. It was incredibly boring, and I speak as somebody who's interested in that matter. Hello to Marlon, who says, good evening, Alistair, and a force for good. Keep up the good work. We certainly will, Marlon, and thank you for your good wishes. Elizabeth says, Sturgeon detests me and does not speak for me. Well, we'll talk about that in a moment, Elizabeth. George, good to hear from you from the great British city of Cardiff. Bring on the anti-SNP, anti-Plaid talk. Well, you're in the right place for that, George. Alan says, hopefully it doesn't take the months predicted to get a decision and she gets told no as soon as possible. Well, let's hope so. But it'd be interesting if it took months and then, like they said, yes, you can have a referendum, and by that time it'll be too late to get everything organised for next October. Nelson says, great to see A Force for Good live again on this Wednesday evening, and good evening to you, Catherine. Carl says, great work. Nice to see Stuart in the house. And Derek. And Debbie, who was first in as always. Dorothy Bain, King's Counsel, sounding very deflated at the Supreme Court today. Yes, she was sounding deflated. I don't know if that's just her natural demeanour or whether she's normally inflated, but today she was deflated. I don't know. Stephen has got a point here that he wishes to make. Independence and Section 29 of the 1998 Scotland Act is the matter. The SNP nearly always touted them as a referendum on independence. Seemed to be the central one. This situation, he says, highlights one of the major intrinsic flaws behind the legislative devolution settlement. It is. It's not been properly clear enough. When the Scotland Act 1998 was put together, the Labour Party that put it together didn't conceive that they would ever lose power, and so didn't think through, well, what would happen if the Scottish Nationalists got power, and can we write something into this law to make it difficult for them to hold referendums and to generally mess up the country? All of that sort of thinking, that forward planning, didn't occur to any of them. And so there's huge gaps in the Scotland Act, which are just unbelievable, really, when you get right down to it. And of course, it's also, as Stephen says, one of the only things that the SNP has is just this constant grievance about referendums. It just delays the inevitable. No referendum, legal and binding, can be decided by Holyrood. And we have been absolutely clear about this from the beginning. It's not for Scotland alone within a devolved structure, while it remains part of the United Kingdom, to engage on a path, which is to say to engage on a referendum which has the potential of destroying the United Kingdom. That's on that basis alone, it's not within Holyrood's competency to do. A devolved parliament cannot set in its tracks the basis of destroying the entire United Kingdom, something that would have negative consequences for people in Northern Ireland, in England and in Wales. If such a path is to be set upon, the only institution that can set it going is the British Parliament, the UK Parliament, the Union Parliament that governs for all of the United Kingdom. That's the only Parliament that could set such a path in motion. And constitutionally, the Union, as we always say, is held together at that level of the Union Parliament. So if you're seeking a mandate for separation, it must be sought at the level of the Union Parliament, at the level of the Parliament that is responsible for all of the United Kingdom. That's where you seek your mandate. You don't seek your mandate in a devolved Holyrood Parliament. And we've been writing about this now since 2014, and we wrote a couple of years ago, we wrote an article which you'll find in the comments there about how Holyrood cannot have a mandate for a second referendum. That's not the place to find it. Constitutionally, that path can only be started upon by the Parliament that is responsible for holding all of the United Kingdom together, and that is the UK Parliament. We've always been clear about that, and that's the constitutional position. And whether the Lords would actually get into politics or not, I don't know. I think they will just simply concentrate on little legal technicalities. That's what I would imagine they would do, unless they decide to write a big screed because they've been reading the Force for Good's website and they think this guy Alistair McConnachie's got it together. We just need to copy and paste what he's saying. Hopefully they might do something like that, but if they don't do that, they're simply just going to be making a case based upon legal technicalities. Now, before we talk about Sturgeon and her apparent hate for people who vote for the Conservative Party, I just want to talk about the Loserfest that was held in George Square on Saturday the 8th of October, just gone there. And this was an organisation, they used to call it Hope Over Fear. I believe it's still run by Tommy Sheridan's group. Last year they got they have a meeting in the square every September. And last year they got 113. And this year what we did was we counted them during the peak time, which was between 1 and 2 p.m. and we counted them 3 times. Once at 1:15, once at 1:30 and once at 1:45, and we took the biggest number that we got out of those 3 counts, and that was 335 people. So this year, the Loserfest in George Square got just over 3 times what it got last year, 335. and there's a picture taken that somebody took from the webcam that looks over George Square, and we'll just, there you go, there, it's actually timestamped there in the corner. That's at 1:22, that's what it looked like. So there's approximately there 335 in that photograph, but we counted a maximum of, as I say, 335 when we were watching from our particular vantage point, it might be said. And there was also in these, a lot of these tents that are in the background there, by the way, that's actually just tents that Weatherspoon put up. These black tents that are along the side of that building, that's actually tents from Weatherspoon's pub that you can sit in if it's raining. So they're not actually part of that event there. Now there's also another interesting picture from that day which we'll put up. There you go. There you go. That's isn't that such a welcoming banner? I mean, imagine if you were of a small c conservative bent and you thought, oh, these interesting Scottish nationalists, I wonder if they've got something to say to me. And that you approach the corner there of George Square and you see that massive banner telling you to get out, to put it mildly. I don't even want to use that word on YouTube because I don't know what they're like. So I don't want to be misunderstood, but you can certainly read it. It's TSC, which stands for Tory Word Out. And that's how welcoming that particular group of people were making anybody who was, shall we say, right of centre. So I think we get exactly what they meant there. Okay. Now that is somewhat of a rather hateful banner, I would say, to say that about Tories. It actually, well, I'm going to say it. It said Tory scum out. Okay, hopefully YouTube won't censor me for that, but that's what it said. And they've had that banner actually for several years now, and we actually wrote an article about that, which you'll also find in the comments, about how a lot of these folk like to make the personal political. Okay, a lot of our sorts, for example, you know, we might take the rise out of some Scottish nationalists now and then, but we don't actually like be vile and nasty to them. We might just have a wee joke at their expense, but we're not aggressively angry against them. Whereas a lot of Nicola Sturgeon's sort of followers are actually quite aggressively angry in their head against people who don't agree with them. And, you know, you have to kind of rise above that in politics. You know, you can't be going about hating people. It's not right, and it's not good, and it's not big, and it's not clever. And so if you've got hatred in your heart, you have to try to get rid of that. And you have to try to swallow your pride, and you have to try to be as diplomatic as you possibly can. But a lot of that is lost on some of those types. And goodness me, that was brought to our attention with Nicola Sturgeon's appalling comment, which I'll get to in a minute. Carl Elsgood says, no appeasement of Scottish nationalism. Alan says, if the Supreme Court allowed this referendum, they will have to allow the SNP to hold any referendum at any time, and they would essentially, they would be tearing up the Scotland Act, as they would just steamroll over all the courts every time. Yes, it would be an absolute travesty. And if the Supreme Court found that there was a loophole there in the Scotland Act that somehow allow the Scottish National Party to hold referendums, then the British government would have to come in and make a new law to correct that and to stop that. That's the only way you could have that, because as you say, Alan, if that did not happen, if that was allowed to stand, then it would be carte blanche, a referendum every day. Get up, what referendum's on today before breakfast? Stephen says, spot on. The Constitution is a reserved issue. Holyrood has no business getting involved in it. That's absolutely so. Christopher says, the SNP are trying to exert political influence on the judiciary. This is extremely dangerous and undemocratic. Christine says, no means no. Adam says, shame the king couldn't punish Sturgeon on the grounds of treason and conspiracy. Well, maybe if we had gone back to the 16th century, that sort of thing might possibly have gone on. But even back then, it was a dangerous thing for kings to punish their political opponents because, you know, there's no end to that, really, because the political opponents also have got power. So, thankfully, we're actually past those days now. And in fact, somebody suggested to me that, you know, maybe Nicola Sturgeon is looking to be friendly with King Charles because she's looking for a new job, you know, so she's maybe wanting just to keep her nose clean with the British establishment these days. That's a thought. Good to see Becky. Trapped in a Sturgeon Scotland ruled by the EU. Couldn't think of anything worse. I know. Oh man, absolutely trapped in a Sturgeon Scotland where hatred of people who disagree has been given free rein. That's another thing you'd have to add in, because look at the, oh, get to it in a minute. Yeah, Stuart says, yeah, it seems to me Sturgeon wants to go and is looking for an excuse to get out. That could be part of the strategy, you know, there's no question. It could be. Steve says, Sturgeon wanted to stay in the EU. The EU is an arm of the New World Order and it's totalitarianism. So take your choice. That's right. The SNP is such a globalist organisation. I mean, they talk about Scottish nationalism as if it's all about Scotland, but when you look at it, it's an incredibly internationalist, globalist organisation. I mean, they want basically open borders in Scotland. They want to rejoin the EU, which, you know, which is basically just a rich man's club, as the old Labourites used to call it back in the 1970s. And it has always been so. But they want that. They want that. And so everything that's really anti-nation, they actually want. We wouldn't have much of a Scotland left if they actually got their way. So, yes, let's talk about Sturgeon and her apparent hate. Sorry, just reading a comment there about why I should move to London and Scotland should keep me out. Thanks for the thought, sir. That's on TikTok. So, what was I saying? Yes. Last Sunday, on the Sunday with Laura Kunsberg, Nicola Sturgeon said that, quote, I detest the Tories, close quote. Now, because I understand the English language, I understand that when you say that, what you mean is members of the Tory party, people who vote Tory, people who are sympathetic to the Tories, people who may have said a good word about the Tories. Okay, that's a significant proportion of the Scottish population. As far as voting goes, it's round about 25% of the entire Scottish electorate, which is to say a quarter, which is to say 1 in 4. Okay, that's a fairly big number of people. Okay, but apparently Nicola Sturgeon detests those people. And think about this, right? She did not say, I detest the Conservative Party. She did not say, I detest Conservative Party policies. She did not say, I detest Tory policies or even Tory values. She said, I detest the Tories, meaning I detest the people who vote or support or may be considering voting for the Conservative Party. That's what she meant. And don't tell me that as a politician of the years of experience and the skill in debating which she has, that somehow she did not understand the meaning of the words that were coming out of her mouth. So she said the Tories deliberately. Now you have to ask, well, why did she say that? Why did she make such a statement which was bound to cause an issue? Well, one, she wants publicity for the party, but there's a deeper thing going on here, right? There's an element of her support which is simply voting for the SNP because these particular people have a lot of hatred in their hearts for Tories as people, as personal people, not for policies or party, but for people. So there's a class vote there, and she's afraid that unless she really ramps up the hate, then these people are going to go back to Labour. That's what she's afraid of, okay? Now, whether Labour want them or not, I don't know, but of course Labour will no doubt be happy just to get their vote. So she wants to keep those people who are motivated by anger and, let's say, hatred, and who do detest Tory types. She wants to keep them on side, and she's afraid that with the Labour Party rising in support at the moment, that these people are going to say, oh, the Labour Party is a better vehicle for my hate. So she's got to speak very basically in order to ensure that the SNP to these people is not just seen as being stronger for Scotland, as they like to say, but actually stronger for hate. Okay, she's got to ensure that if your primary motivation, or if one of your strong motivations for voting is hatred, then the SNP is the party for you. That's what she's got to ensure. And she can put that out, and she knows she's not going to really suffer from that. It's not like there's all these unionists and Tories around who were going to vote for the SNP and who are no longer going to vote for her now. So she knows she's not really going to electorally suffer for that. In fact, she's probably going to retain that core element that she needs to retain and stop them going back to Labour. So that will be her main motivation for being so outspoken about that. That's pretty sad, really, isn't it, when you think about that? I mean, talk about a sad reason to get into politics, to encourage the people who hate. That's a pity. That's a pity, but that's what that language is about. And of course, that's dangerous. That's dangerous for society, ultimately, because, you know, she's greenlighting, as you might say, for hostility towards, well, anybody really who isn't going along with her plan. Okay, so she's saying it's okay, basically, to detest people. And it's very interesting that none of her MPs or MSPs spoke out against that. That just shows the discipline of that party. Imagine if Douglas Ross, for example, had said, I detest, or some leader of some political party had said, I detest Scottish nationalists. You would never hear the end of that, and he would have to resign. The person that said that would have to resign. Okay, undoubtedly, they'd have to resign. If somebody said, if they were to say something about how much they detested, say, people who voted for Labour, they would have to resign. That's, but somehow Sturgeon gets away with it. Interesting. And again, as I say, as I was talking about earlier there, making the personal political. And the green light to hate comes from the very top. You know, you saw that picture earlier that we put up about that banner, Tory Scum Out banner, at George Square at the Scottish Nationalist rally on Saturday the 8th. You know, the permission to do that comes from the very top, as it were, because the people at the very top are setting that style. And so it's okay for everybody else to go along with that. So permission to hate in Scotland is unfortunately coming from the very top. And that's a sad thing. And what can we do about it? Well, we have to hope. And those of us who pray have to pray for wisdom in our political leadership class. So, Becky says about that Yestival, she says their page shows, the Yestival page shows pictures taken from the stage, so it looks busier. That's right. It was only maybe 4 or 5 rows deep. But if you take a picture, it looks like the rows keep going back and back. So Hugo says, hopefully the Supreme Court will ban Nicola Sturgeon. Well, they won't do that, but that would be funny. So Adam says, yeah, in other news, Liverpool beats Glasgow in being the host of Eurovision in a huge blow to Sturgeon. Who'd want to host Eurovision in a city full of rubbish that hasn't been properly collected? Well, I'm sure it would get spruced up for Eurovision. Oh well, it would have been an opportunity for us to fly our Union Jacks, but probably it would have been far too much of an opportunity for Nicola Sturgeon simply to grandstand. So perhaps it's all for the best that it went to Liverpool. Okay, well, we've got our competition coming up in a few minutes, and it is for this little cracker of a badge. No, it's not a badge, it's a fridge magnet with a Union Jack and a Mini Cooper. And it says, Monte Carlo Rally, first place. I wonder if that's related to the Michael Caine film. Somebody might know. And we'll also throw in a trolley token for you as well. Union Jack trolley token. So on this day in British history, because British history matters, because if we don't know where we've been, then we don't know where we are, which means we don't know where we are going to go. Understanding British history helps to locate us in the present with a story which tells us how we all got here, for good or for bad, for difficult or for easy, or for good or for ill. So we're always telling the British story. And on this day, 12th of October in 1915, a woman who was to go down in history as a British heroine was shot dead. Edith Cavell, a British nurse in World War I, shot by the German firing squad. Now, what was that all about? Well, in 1907, she was recruited to be matron of a newly established nursing school near Brussels. And by 1911, she was training nurses for 3 hospitals and 24 schools and kindergartens as well. But she was arrested in August 1915 and she was charged with harbouring Allied soldiers. And it's thought that she helped around 200 Allied soldiers to escape from German-occupied Belgium. And for this she was arrested by the Germans, court-martialed and sentenced to death. And of course this was 1915 and it was a very violent era, murderous some would say, and she was shot dead. And the Geneva Convention guaranteed protection of medical personnel such as nurses like Edith Cavell. However, that protection was forfeit if you were using that protection as a cover for what might be termed belligerent action. And so the Germans believed that she was using her status as a nurse to essentially engage in activities which would be illegal under the Geneva Convention, that is, harbouring what they regarded as enemy soldiers. So she was returned after the war. Her body was returned to Britain, and a state funeral was held at Westminster Abbey, and she was buried at Norwich Cathedral, where she had near where she had been born. And we've got a picture of the monument which stands in St Martin's Place, which is just off Trafalgar Square, and it's a really, really impressive monument. And it's quite a Christian monument as well. There it is. It says, at the top it says humanity, but on each corner there's different words. The other words are devotion, fortitude, sacrifice. And below it there it says Edith Cavell, Brussels Dawn, October the 12th, 1915. Patriotism is not enough. I must have no hatred or bitterness for anyone. Well, that's interesting. I must have no hatred or bitterness for anyone. And there at the top there's a big cross with an angel, and it says, for king and country. And at the back there's the British Lion under the word that says fortitude, and above that it says faithful unto death. So that's a really impressive memorial. It's a big memorial as well. It sits just off Trafalgar Square, and that was Edith Cavell. But yeah, patriotism is not enough. I must have no hatred or bitterness for anyone. She should tell that to Nicola Sturgeon. Indeed, no hatred or bitterness for anyone. Okay. So that was on this day, on the 12th of October 1915, Edith Cavell was executed by the Germans. And I believe there's a Cavell Gardens in Inverness, if anybody can set me straight on that. Okay. Now, Michael Bridges says the UK needs a Clarity Act to set the rules around referendums. It's an interesting point, and it's certainly something that should be raised by the government. You know, they should always be raising ideas, whether or not they're going to carry them through or not. They should always be raising ideas just to keep the Scottish nationalists on their back feet, on their always setting the agenda. You know, imagine if the Tories come out and said we need a Clarity Act. Can you imagine the tailspin that the SNP would go into? So, you know, they should always just be putting out these ideas just to keep the SNP confused and worried, and to prevent the SNP setting the agenda. So Becky says that in their eyes, if you don't worship Nicola Sturgeon, you're a traitor to Scotland. That's what some of them seem to think. Lone Star says, why break away from the British Union only to run towards the faceless European Union? It makes no sense to me. Well, it makes no sense to a lot of us, Lone Star. Derek says, if Nicola Sturgeon does want to keep in with the British establishment, she should get a new job cleaning at Balmoral Castle. Yeah. So, Adam, so could you? Okay, so before I move into busting Indy Myths, and we've got some new people coming in tonight as well, which is always good. Before we go on to busting Indy Myths part 19, which is a cracker, by the way, I'm going to ask a question about this, not about this, but for this. And if you want to win this, all you need to do is to send an email, send the answer to contact@aforceforgood.uk, and the first person with the correct answer will get this winging the way to them tomorrow, and will also get a Union Jack trolley token. It's all to play for, folks, all to play for. So the question that I'm going to ask is a serious question. There is a statue in St Martin's Place, just off Trafalgar Square, to which British heroine? Send your answer into contact@aforceforgood.uk, and this could be winging its way to you tomorrow. And Stephen says, regarding Nicola Sturgeon's comments, if you replaced the word Tory with any other race or religious group, you would be arrested and in court. So why is she allowed to get away with it? It's an interesting question. Well, I suppose the answer is that the Anti-Free Speech Act, which she set up, the Hate Speech Act, is about hate speech towards particular groups of people that are identified in the Act, and hatred towards Tories is not one of the identified classes of people to which you're not allowed to speak hatefully towards. Alfie says that the SNP should be paying for any court sitting that they are holding to and demanding. Brilliant. Adam Anderson says, if you're so confident, let the Scottish public decide. And you know, Adam, you read my mind, because it's now time for busting Indy Myths part 19, and we're going to address that very question, because we are busting Indy Myths on the daily, weekly, monthly and yearly until the Scot Nats see clearly that we're down with the capital A to the double FG. And in this busting Indy Myths part 19, we are going to address the oft-heard myth that people in the United Kingdom, we unionists, we pro-UK people, are scared of having another referendum. The implication being, of course, that we're afraid that we might lose it. And I'm going to explain it's not about that. It's not about fear. It's about our duty of care to something that we love, which means we do not endanger it needlessly. And it's about the fact that we have absolutely nothing to gain from another referendum, which I'm about to explain to you very clearly. So, they'll say things like, if you believe in the UK so much, why be afraid to ask the people of Scotland the same question again? It's intended to goad us into yielding. Well, there are several reasons why we're not going to fall for that, regardless of the overwhelming fact that we've already had a referendum and we already won decisively. But apart from that, there are plenty of reasons why we're not wanting to have a second one. And the first thing that needs to be said, right, is a fundamental matter of principle. And it's seldom said, but it needs to be said and it needs to be heard. And it's this: Scotland has a right to stay in the United Kingdom. You know, all we ever hear is from the complaining Nats is, Scotland's got a right to leave. Okay, by the same token, Scotland has a right to stay in the United Kingdom. Okay, how about that for a change? How about hearing that for a change? Scotland has a right to stay in the United Kingdom. We have a right to stay in the United Kingdom. That's the fundamental philosophical point here at stake. We have a right to stay. And in that sense, we depend entirely upon a parliament and the government which comes from that parliament in London, the British Parliament, the UK Parliament, the Union Parliament. We depend upon them to keep us together, to stand for our right to stay in the UK, to safeguard the integrity of the UK, to safeguard us, to keep us all together. We depend upon the British Parliament to do that. It has the absolute right and responsibility and duty to keep the United Kingdom together on behalf of all the people throughout our islands who believe in the United Kingdom, from Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales and England. So that's the first thing that needs to be said. We have a right to stay in the UK, and we have a right to do whatever is required democratically to ensure that. Now, to address the matter of whether or not we are scared of having a second referendum, our response follows from that fundamental principle that we have a right to stay in the UK. Firstly, we love the United Kingdom, and you don't casually risk the life of something that you love on some kind of throw of the dice, which who knows how it could go. You don't do that with something that you love. You have a duty of care to it. You have a duty of care to protect it and to not endanger it needlessly. And for the United Kingdom to function, its very existence should not be constantly put up for question. Okay, you have to have somebody, and it's the British Parliament, who says, we're standing by the United Kingdom, we're not going to risk it, we're not going to endanger its life needlessly. So we have a duty of care. We love the United Kingdom, and from that follows our duty of care not to endanger it needlessly. Now, on top of that, and here's the thing, we have absolutely nothing to gain from a second referendum. Think about it. Even if the pro-UK people were to concede a second referendum, do you think that we'd be somehow thanked for that? Do you think if the Scottish Nationalists were granted another referendum that they'd be oh so thankful? Oh, look at these unionists, they've granted another referendum, what a great bunch of lads. Of course not. They would do what they always do, which is they would take what they were given, they would bank it, and they would then pretend that they never received it, okay? Because that's their modus operandi. That's what they always do. And they have to take things without thanks because they have to maintain their grievance strategy, okay? Their grievance strategy of always being upset is what keeps their supporters motivated. Okay, so they're never going to thank you, even if you gave them a referendum. Secondly, they'd still accuse us of being fearful. They'd say, oh, now that they've granted a second referendum, they're on the run. They're running scared. Look at them. Scaredy-cat unionists. They're afraid. So they're not going to stop us. They're not going to stop accusing us of being fearful. Thirdly, it's not going to stop them complaining. Okay, all their grievance would quickly switch to complaining about the terms of the referendum. You know, if we were to say, well, only British citizens should be able to vote, they'd go, oh, you're trying to gerrymander the electorate. If we were to say you have to get 60% of the entire electorate before you're considered to have reached the required threshold to ensure that most people are actually for this. You know, if we set a threshold like that, they're going to say, oh, no, you're gerrymandering. So it's not going to stop them complaining. And ultimately, here's the thing. Even if we won a second referendum, it would settle nothing. It would settle nothing, okay? It would not put it to bed, because do you think these Scottish nationalists are going to go to bed? Do you think they're going to go, oh, well, that's 2 referendums now. Ah, well, we had our shot. Let's just find a new hobby. No. If it was approximately the same result, or if it was a closer margin than in 2014, then they're just going to say, we're even closer to our goal than ever before. Game on for a third one. And if we won by a greater margin, well, it might quiet things down for a little while, but so long as the SNP and Greens were still in control at Holyrood, they'd keep the pot boiling. So even if we had it, and even if we won, it would settle nothing. And it might even make things worse by encouraging them to go for a third. So why go to all that bother, even if we were to win, just for them to start campaigning for yet another? So there's nothing to gain here. So to summarise, we're not scared to have another referendum. Rather, we believe we have a right to stay in the UK and to do what is required to stay. And our union parliament has the right, responsibility and duty to stand up for the integrity of the UK on behalf of all the people of our islands who believe in the United Kingdom. And we love the United Kingdom, and we have a duty of care to it, not to endanger it needlessly. And we have absolutely nothing to gain from a second referendum, because even if there was one, then they won't thank us. They'll keep complaining, and they'll continue to accuse us of being fearful. And even if we won, it would settle nothing, because they'd start campaigning for another one. So we're not scared of a second referendum. We're just sensible. Thus endeth Busting Indy Myths Part 19. Now, Adam, if you're still listening, I hope that fully answered your question. So where are we on matters? Many of you will know that the coronation is going to be next year on Saturday the 6th of May 2023, so that's something to look forward to. Some of you might not have heard that yet, but that was announced last night. Lots of comments coming in. There's so many comments tonight that it's difficult to actually read them out. Catherine says, knocked it out the park. Thanks for that. Derek says, couldn't have said it any better. Well said. Stuart, I like that, Stuart. It says, superb stuff, Alistair. Team up with Neil Oliver and the union is saved. That's a nice comment. Thank you, Stuart. GSTK, says Stephen, God save the king. Marion says, spot on, we have a right to stay. That's interesting. Double O Mo says the SNP were the only party bloc in Westminster to vote against the passing of the 2016 Referendum Act. They are utter hypocrites. So they didn't actually want a referendum then. in 2016. That was the Brexit one. And James says, well, the Nationalists are not going to give up because they don't understand the merits of the union. Well, it's our job to try to convince those who are open to hearing, those who have ears to hear and eyes to see. It's our job to try to convince them as much as possible and to try to create the materials which will enable people to understand the value. One of them being, of course, our wee book for the union. Please do get yours. It's on our shop, and you can see the shop there along the bottom, aforceforgood.uk/shop-1. That's only a £5. It's one of our best sellers, and it does keep us going. And something else that keeps us going, of course, is our union supporters program, where we have people who donate from 69 pence a week, which works out at £3 a month. And some people donate £5 a month, and some people donate more than that, but they really ensure that we're able to plan from month to month. So please do become a union supporter if you can, and there's lots of rewards available, such as our badge, such as our magazines that get sent to you free. And we've got a new magazine that will be coming out, issue 7 will be coming out, God willing, towards the end of November, and that will be the first 20 of our Busting Indy Myths put into a hard copy magazine, which we'll be able to distribute at our street stalls for free, and also to the people who are union supporters. We have a winner. Fantastic. We have a winner of our competition. Now, the competition is for this fridge magnet, along with our Union Jack trolley token. And we asked the question, serious question, that on there's a statue in St Martin's Place to the great British heroine who was shot on this day in 1915. And the answer, of course, it's Edith Cavell's statue, which, if you're in London, please check it out. And the winner is John Stephen. Fantastic, John. I'm glad that you've won. This will be winging its way to you tomorrow. Now, could you use the same email that you sent in your answer, and please give us your address via that email, and we'll get that in the post to you tomorrow, along with your Union Jack trolley token. Great stuff. Great stuff. Now, thanks for everybody on TikTok. So many comments on TikTok tonight. Great numbers of folk watching. Thanks for all the supportive comments, and for the comments that weren't so supportive. That's fine. Everybody's entitled to their opinion. But we're always here every Wednesday between 7 and 8, and you'll hear the finest unionist chat here, and the finest unionist points made. There's really, at this moment, we are doing a lot of good work here for the union. Stephen says, congrats, John. Stuart says, well done, John. Becky says, well done. Catherine says, congratulations. I think we lost There we go. James says, buy your union flags from AFFG because they are superb. Well, I know John is a happy customer of our bespoke Union Jack flag, which has got an open hem to put your Union Jack pole in. So there we go. And you get them from our shop. Good stuff. Good stuff. Folks, we've come to the top of the hour. It's time to say goodbye. I just want to say thank you to everybody who's commented on all the platforms. And we'll be back next Wednesday at 7 o'clock. Until then, as we always say, God bless the United Kingdom and God save the King. See you next week.